maybe take a breath, take a minute to center ourselves, and then we'll let John take it away.
Wait a minute.
I think most of us are in the room, John.
Okay, we'll just take it away. Can you all hear me?
The mic's not on, I don't think.
Yeah, I think just
Push that little button.
Yep.
There you go.
Should work.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, it really is, it has been an impressive day so far. I think my wife and I will just, by the way, my wife actually came with us. She decided to come swimming with me. We're from Florida, so I apologize on behalf of Florida. I don't know if you know that in Florida the word climate change is not allowed in official documents by the governor. So I think we are living in a slightly different climate to the one you are, which doesn't take away or add very much, other than clearly we're a highly fragmented country. And my wife and I both became U.S. citizens 2 years ago. We actually came to the United States so that I could do my PhD, and I'll be here 12, 13 years later, surprisingly enough. We both come from an educational background. I'm an educator. I'm at Florida Atlantic University, so I feel that in Florida and Southeast Florida, which is doing some great work. I may be able to talk about that a little bit. But one of the things that's most impacted both of us is this is the first time we've felt that there is a conversation with real heart. And that's something, one of the things I will be talking about from my research. And if there's one thing that I believe that we need to be able to do, particularly with Carol's comments about rigorous examination, is that we need to be able to do real research and be able to stand on the basis of real evidence, not necessarily indicators or standards, but real evidence coming from a different space. And that space has not been defined. And that's the space I think Carol was definitely pointing at this morning, and clearly Hunter has been doing so much over so many years that I feel that hopefully I'll be able to add to that conversation a little bit from my own research. And so the first question I ask is, what do you think we as a species face in terms of our greatest challenge?
Our own extinction.
But that's not, that's a problem for somebody. It's a problem for us. Because do we regenerate with the planet, or do we allow the planet to regenerate itself without us? It's a binary. Either we regenerate, or we learn how to do it, or we disappear. And the planet will be very grateful for many reasons. But what is the question? What's the answer to that question? Yes, sir.
Overcoming the tragedy of the commons.
Tragedy of the commons, again, is an effect, not a cause.
It's also not real.
Can someone explain what that is?
Tragedy of the Commons was an article written by Garrett Hardman, who said that when you have a commons resource, greedy individuals will take more than their fair share and it will all collapse, i.e. that's what's happening today. If you read Lynn Ostrom's work, commons are traditionally governed very wisely by people who actually have a stake in a commons. They set up self-regulating regulations, they talk them out, they evolve these regulations that are very wise. Commons work very well. What we have is a non-commons, i.e. the air, or the ability to pollute into, that is being greedily grabbed by advocates or adherents to neoliberalism. And what Hardman called the tragedy of the commons is actually just a continuation of the neoliberal paradigm. And I would argue that the regenerative paradigm is a rethinking of who we are as a species, i.e. we're not greedy, and I talked about that this morning, and that we have the capacity for self-governance, for wisdom, for working together, and that this is what, this is a core part of what a regenerative system is and that it, what Len was talking about with how do you manage commons is a part of that.
Yeah, I would add just one more comment. It's not just the exploitation of the commons, it's the race to, once it starts. You end up with the Easter Island scenario in which they race to cut down the last tree.
Fair enough. Again, that is a behavior which is rooted in something else. Go ahead.
I guess I view the biggest problem we have is that we as individuals and as a species have lost our connection to understanding that we are a biologic organism, a social organism, and with a spiritual dimension. And if we do not, if we're incapable, if we don't understand that, which means then you understand what you need to function in those different areas, you can't make, your species will be threatened completely. It's that fundamental understanding which all the shamans and the Aboriginal cultures very much had in the early days of this country. We did understand it a lot more than we do today. We have no idea that we need clean air and clean water and clean soils. And we also don't believe or understand that we are spiritual beings. We're part of the energy of the universe, whatever you want to call it. And it's our lack of, our negative or positive contribution to that actually generates across a wide spectrum.
Well, that's answering your question much more broadly. The simple answer is consciousness. However you want to define that. We focus on behaviors, we focus on what we do, and we find it very hard to codify who we are. Not only where we belong, but who we are, as someone said not so long ago, we are human beings, not human doings. And everything we do is a direct reflection, translation of who we are. So the quality of who we are determines how we behave. So when you began speaking at the panel about going inward, beginning to actually bring out things like respect, which, as I was saying before, respect is a result of something else. If you don't have personal integrity, you cannot respect. But if you can't respect another person's integrity, because culturally, integrity may be actually understood very differently in different cultures. Again, it becomes very complex how we don't belong to where we belong. And I also, do we have any Native Americans from this location here?
Oh, no, not really.
Okay.
They were invited.
Okay. So we are all displaced and relocated. We certainly are. We come from an entirely different culture. I'm now the chair of the diversity committee of the College of Education at my university. And imagine trying to figure that out. In a state that actually is probably 90% transient, immigrant, and now under threat. So it is a very complex environment where fear, as Carol was saying earlier, drives behavior, where that underlying anxiety and stress drives behavior, and where greed begins to drive behavior as well and continues to run our systems in ways that really don't serve us or don't serve anything else. And so as a suggestion, of course, Bill McDonough and researchers brought this up as an alternative to the triple bottom line, as a more aspirational definition of who we are, hopefully as a triple top line, which is how can we grow prosperity, build community, and help enhance the health of all species for all time. That's it.
That's what we're here for.
Now we've got to figure this thing out. So, the logic, of course, here, human evolution, again, with Einstein, you can't change what we're doing today with the thinking that created it, the problems that we have. And there is a need to understand that we've got to be willing to let go of everything that no longer serves us, which in society is just about everything. And I absolutely agree with Carol that human systems are not operating in our service or in the service of this planet. In order to do that, we must redefine who we are before we can possibly redesign what we do. But that redesign is something that we don't know how to do. Our schools don't do it. We don't teach our kids how to be. And with the standards movement and obviously the accountability-based systems that the politicians have given us, all we are accomplishing is a number of compliance-based individuals who do not know who they are and certainly cannot contribute to society responsibly, civic-mindedly, and clearly with a deeper understanding of their own sense of meaning, of who they are. And that spark is what drives us all, whether you call it purpose or meaning or significance or contribution. There is something internal that is not social. There's something internal that is even biological. If you believe Brené Brown, there's a biological imperative that pushes us to connect with each other, hopefully for the right reasons. So, the theory of change, and I'm going to use some computer language, and I apologize, we can discuss it, and if we can find a better term, then I'd love to adopt it. We must change the internal operating system before we can change the social operating system. And it takes a bit of courage to come out and be able to say this. This is not something I can say in many places, particularly not in Florida. It's not popular. It's not something that we value. If we don't value something, we won't cultivate it. And consciousness is not something you can measure. It's not something you can place in an accountability kind of spreadsheet. You can't look at it as data. However, it does have very real effects. This is the third time I've come to Colorado. 18 months ago, I actually went to the Mindfulness Sustainability Professionals Retreat out at Shadowcliff in Grand Lake. Well, we had half an hour of meditation and 2 days worth of people overwhelmed by data management technological issues. The sustainability professionals in this industry are absolutely dying in their companies because they don't know why they're doing what they're doing any longer. They've lost sense of direction. They seem to be losing the connection to a bigger thing that brought them to this place in the first place. And we seem to need to get to a much better place in terms of the conversations we're having in our organizations. And so that requires will, our own personal, individual will and collective will, as so many of you expressed so well today in so many different ways in so many different environments. Whether it's finance or education or business or community work, definitely in education, there is the need for our will to come together as an individual and then as a society or as a community to figure out what source-based really means. And so, quite humbly to add to the conversation, the framework. And again, this is an approximation, and the framework only offers my research findings from having spoken and interviewed very scientifically, because I'm a grounded theorist, and if you're familiar with qualitative research, that's my approach to research. These are exemplars in the sustainability environment over the past 10 years, or those people who have brought regeneration to their discourse in their organizations. In the for-profit sector, with companies like Nike and Seventh Generation, actually Carol and I realized in a conversation on the phone the other day that our paths metaphorically crossed in Seventh Generation a few years ago, because I actually interviewed Gregor Barnum, the Director of Corporate Consciousness of Seventh Generation. And Jeffrey Hollander was actually the CIO, the Chief Inspiration Officer of that company. So people who are rebranding not just their company and their products, but themselves seeking meaning in a different way. And so in 1962, the most popular thing in the United States was Marilyn Monroe. The most beautiful thing. Do you know what the second one was? Anybody? Cellophane. Saran wrap was the product of Shell Oil, and this is one of the people I worked with in my research, was created in part by Shell Oil, looking for a product that would never go away. That was the concept of perfection. How can we create a product that will never deteriorate?
Oh my God.
Right? Well, this professor now, this lady, she's of Indian descent. She's now in India with college students picking up garbage around India. Because India doesn't have a waste management system, so anything inorganic does not go away. So some of the sustainability leaders today are actually coming out of a space of guilt. And some, I'm sure you've encountered some of them. So within the nonprofit, government, for-profit, and education world, these particular exemplars that were actually reported to me were people I followed up. And as a practice in my research, in order to avoid bias, because we tend to get passionate and bias does come into the picture, I had a practice of meditation before interviewing them, so that I would have an equanimity about how I asked the questions I asked them, and obviously try to avoid engaging in a conversation that would tinge their responses. So what you get here, it may be fairly basic, and I'm sure you're not going to find anything revolutionary here, but I think you will find at least it'll help confirm some of the things that you've been saying today in terms of how do leaders operate in their organizations to try to get to that space that all of you are talking about, or that we are aspiring to, in terms of the triple top 9. And for this, I've actually adapted somebody who's Carlos, again, not particularly favorably impressed with, is Ken Wilber, but since he's a Colorado resident, I've used his background of his integral theory just to throw my spaghetti on the wall, if you will. But I've turned his framework around slightly, and you'll see why. And I've also had a long relationship with Otto Scharmer. So those of you familiar with Theory U or now his more recent work with the MIT edX and the hubs around the world will know some of his work. So in this case, if you can see the framework actually is divided into Carol's third level of quadrants, where she put those quadrants in. But I've actually turned it on its side. So the 4 quadrants are actually represented by 4 dimensions of human existence. The bottom 2 actually reflect our inner self, both the individual and the social or the organizational. So the inner dimensions of who we are. And above the horizon is the world of behavior, the world of performance, the world of what we do. And from Otto Scharmer, I borrowed this, which is the topsoil. Since we're talking about agriculture and regenerative agriculture, the soil of human beings is our mind and our heart. It is our consciousness. And our work as regenerative leaders from this research is to cultivate that soil, not to prune it, not to shape it in any way other than to provide nutrients in that soil so that field becomes deeper. And that field actually goes into that subsoil of consciousness in order to bring out what Thich Nhat Hanh would say, rather than weeds, but bring out flowers and fruit and vegetables. So how do we do that? How do we do that with our kids? How do we do that with each other? So how do we show that respect, intellectual, moral, spiritual respect for our identities and who we truly are? And one of the difficulties we all have is being here and now, being in the present. And that's where Pat and I work in that space of regenerative psyche, or regenerative emotion, or regenerative self, of how do we stop the distractions that actually diffuse our energy and takes it away and puts it somewhere else so we can't be here. Because the work we're doing here is critical to the survival of the human race, not critical to the planet. But if we want to carry on, we're going to give our grandchildren a life of the quality we hope for them to have, then this is a critical conversation. And so some of the dimensions of the individual as a regenerative leader in that quadrant of the individual in the inner self are these. These are the things that they have shared with me that correlate across all of these domains, both in business, nonprofit, government, and education. One of them is, and you've mentioned it several times, the big one about mindset, is there is something bigger than me here. I might not be able to define it, but there is something more important than me that drives me, that actually excites me and wants me to go and do something. It's more powerful than me. It drives me even when I don't want to. And one of the things that comes out of this particular dimension of being is courage, is fearlessness, the sense that it doesn't matter where I am, I'm going to talk about this regardless. It's more powerful. It overcomes all my misgivings about myself, all the shame that I feel, going back to Brené Brown and her work about how we don't feel that we're good enough. We can't, none of us know everything. None of us know the whole thing. We can't figure it out on our own. And so there is an importance to that sense of this bigger thing that's driving me that is critical. And that is not, there's not only one, there's many meanings. So again, it's not one contract that we have, but there certainly are a number. Creative intelligence, there's this overemphasis on reason. Reason's what screwed us up. Ever since Descartes and Francis Bacon brought out the rational paradigm, a mechanical universe, we have been thinking along linear mechanical systems that are taking us in the direction, of course, of Fleming's over the end of the cliff, the edge of the cliff. So how do we break that? Well, one is we can no longer depend only on reason to solve the problems because reasons were created in the first place. So the second item, of course, is creative intelligence, which means that there are so many other faculties that we have that we don't even know how to tap into. And that, in particular, is pathway of how we have this spark of energy that through intuition, through imagination, through all sorts of other higher faculties that we do have access to. If we want to do that work, we can have access to. They are there for everybody, the same as water, air, and everything else around us. However, it's not something we'll pay attention to. And so therefore, if you don't go to the gym, you're not going to build muscle. If you don't do the spiritual work, you're not going to build this kind of creative intelligence. And thank God women are coming back into the conversation, because this is far more natural to you than it is to us guys. And you value it much more than we do. We submit, we comply with the regulations and the standards and the policies, and all of that is wonderful stuff. And you can put it in a scorecard, and a balanced scorecard, and we can measure it to death, and we're doing great. And yet somehow we're not. Systems thinking, again, another obvious one. These people sense systems. They call it systems thinking, but I think that's a misnomer. And I think Otto Sharma has a very good point to that about presencing. We sense systems. We can't think them. Systems are too complex. So we can sense what is right and what is not working, how we are out of balance. We can sense that, we can intuit it. It's very difficult to actually write it down and communicate it in language. So how do we create that conversation when we don't have a language that can express? And that's why we go back to the spreadsheet, which is unfortunate. So there's that difficulty we have in actually coming to terms with Donella Meadows' work, and everything that's happened over the last 50 years that's actually been proven correct in terms of domestic growth and why. And then global ethics, another big term that I'll try to capture some of what it means. Global ethics for these people is, I can balance my self-interest against the common good. So when you were talking about minorities, or you're talking about women, or you're talking about exclusion, a global ethic actually is inclusive. What it means for each individual is entirely up to you. But within the conversation, we can actually broaden that concept to include and balance and say, is what I'm doing actually balancing out? There's a question from here about the daughter, the 22-year-old daughter, about this sort of bulimia of sustainability, right? That you're going crazy trying to measure everything and having zero impact and doing dysfunctional things. How do you reach some sort of sense of health and well-being, which is the whole purpose of the triple top line even, if you can't get beyond at least balancing that harmony? And finally, that idea of emerging futures. We don't know what the future brings. We don't know what the economy is going to do. Some of you are building seeds, and of course, was Beth, she around? Oh, so the whole notion of seed, of actually planting that seed that you are doing is very powerful. And for me, I've learned a lot more, and I probably won't teach anybody. The idea that it's complex, it's ambiguous, it's ambivalent, not everything is good, but we must make a choice every moment of our lives. With that global ethics, and if we get into the sense of quantum physics, and the fact that every decision we make affects everything else in the universe immediately, and if we get into topics like non-locality, where we have this replication throughout the universe, everything we do and everything we think, then that picture for the 22-year-old gets even worse. So how do we do that if we can't balance that ethic? And allow that future to illustrate itself to us and reveal itself to us. And this conversation actually is conducive to that. So this churning internal dialogue with myself and working towards understanding who we are and how we are, then can actually lead to behaviors that will be more wise, more respectful, have greater integrity, and greater chances of really building something that you don't have to put into metrics in the way that at least some of us talk about. So a regenerative leader is purpose-driven, not necessarily mission-driven, but there's something pushing. But that, because we believe in free will, it's like we believe in free will. My purpose cannot overwhelm the purpose of another. So how do I help another find their purpose? Why are they here in this environment for at this time, for a shorter or a longer period of time, and how together do we build something amazing? So the regenerative leader actually is driven to help others become themselves. And whether it's an impoverished community, a vulnerable community, which we're working on now in Southeast Florida, particularly sea level rise and flooding, and all the impacts that Denver doesn't see, even though water is an issue for you guys as well. The idea of actually going out and helping somebody become themselves, as when you look at microfinance, some of the work I've done in Central America, or I actually work out at UPeace, the United Nations in Costa Rica, with a diploma for social innovation, teaching regenerative leadership and sustainable development, peacekeeping in Somalia, and actually how do you re-socialize kids who are being co-opted into guerrillas from prison back into society when they're suffering from mental issues, which in a Muslim community, mental issues are not accepted. So how do you reconcile that? How do you circle, how do you close that circle? So there are some amazing things, well, some, I would say, huge challenges about how do we have those conversations. And again, we are sitting on land here that does not belong to us. We are borrowing it from someone. Iterative observation is another finding. Really great leaders are humble enough to say, I don't know it all. Who's doing it better than I am? And they go out and find it. And they imitate. As Dali said, we learn through imitation. And so the better ones, the great models, some of the ones that you are building here today, are worthy of being shared. The more people should be listening to you. Now, because of my work, as I was saying to Beth, my question to you is, why is this happening here? My work is not really to get interested in what you're doing, but to answer the question, why is it happening? And if we can answer that question in here, then we'll be a lot clearer to building that model. Because something's happening here that's different. Other people are doing their own things, but they're isolated, they're fragmented, they're not coming together in this sense of community that's very powerful in very different industries. And so answering that why question could be very interesting. Deep listening, the same as iterative observation. Do we truly listen to each other? This is what these people do. They truly care about what they and their people are all about. Not what they're doing, what they are about. So the listening goes far deeper than just about behaviors or metrics, or what have you accomplished today, and are you hitting the goals and the objectives? And it's a dynamic thing. And finally, as many of you said, multiple or multi-stakeholder engagement. Again, design is one of these issues that we have difficulty with, the same as strategic planning, which no longer exists, by the way. We talk about strategic thinking or strategic mindfulness. Can we get mindful about our strategies? Again, that's a very, very difficult, flowing, moving thing. But multiple stakeholder engagement means that your client is at the table at the beginning of the conversation. How many of you have created systems and solutions for somebody rather than with someone? So again, one of the questions that these people answer is, we did it with them. That was the greatest success. It wasn't consultation, it wasn't a custom survey. We went out there into that community and we wanted to create a community center. We said, hey, guys, is this money? What would you like? And if we want to make it accessible, ADA accessible, we bring in people with physical disability, with mental disability. We have the conversation with them all. And of course, in impoverished communities, people who don't even know how to articulate what they want, how do you help translate what they want? And so that engagement is critical to avoid the externalities that one of you, of course, was talking about before. The other thing about these leaders is they don't do anything to the organization. They don't create the mission. They don't create the vision. They don't create the goals. They actually build the culture, or shall we say, promote and foster the culture. So the indirect nature of these leaders is they go and they have the generative dialogue. And I'm going to bring in a couple of concepts here that I'm sure you resonate with once you see them. They look a little difficult. But the idea of the collective purpose and why are we here is daily. And this turns into what one green real estate from Georgia, a very nice guy, told me. You're all familiar with innovation burnout? Because it's never good enough. If you're in regeneration, you're all frustrated about the fact that you're not there, right? So we have to be very careful about our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. We've got to take care of our own energy, because if not, we get into this innovation burnout cycle, which actually will not allow us to be as effective as we could be. So these are some of the things that emerge from that. So, transconceptual dynamics. Well, that's a big word for a very simple thing. Getting beyond the rational. Do these leaders, and do you encourage in your people, the capacity to bring their imagination and their intuition to work? As I believe Einstein said, imagination is the master, reason is the servant, who turn the whole damn thing upside down. So one of the things they've found for the greatest solutions in these organizations is not to talk about the numbers, and to give everybody a voice at the table. And by this, it doesn't mean that this is a free-for-all, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, because there still are hierarchies. And triple loop learning, for those of you who are familiar with organizational management, are familiar with single loop learning, double loop learning, and Chris Argyris and Donald Schoen. Of course, single loop learning is about the end of the assembly line, your quality control, wheels fall off the car when you go out and test it. You make sure you go back to the assembly line, you fix that problem, then the car comes up okay, but we don't fix the system at all. Double loop learning, we begin to ask, why are we doing this? So you get into things like Lexus, obviously in Japan, where they actually they take down and they rebuild their factories every 18 months, and that's probably getting down to 12, and you can build your own car. Triple loop learning is acknowledging that nothing of that works anymore. And we have to be willing to let go of absolutely everything we think we know about how the world operates. And to engage the possibility, or the potential, I think as Carol would call it, of what is still not being seen. Because the way we're doing things is still reduce, reuse, recycle. We're not redesigning. We are creating new models, better ones, and certainly they're up on that ladder. And again, part of the work that Pat does, we no longer talk about evolution. Evolution seems to have become a bit of an old paradigm. We talk about ascension, or Shama talks about vertical development, and Hunter brought the ladder. The idea we have to go up into higher levels of frequency in how we operate. We all have an electromagnetic aura. And you know, when you go into space like this one, and you feel great. And when you go into a space and you don't feel so great, and people shut you down. And we've all been at meetings like that. Yes, where you do not expose yourself. And that is a critical question to ask ourselves. Do we really contribute to the conversation by having absolute capacity to acknowledge that the way we do just about everything is only an approximation to the truth, to what is really how the universe works? Because physics is there, it's not going to go away. Consciousness now, physicists are telling us, they're discovering consciousness is an emergence from the physical world, from the laws of physics, from how the universe is mathematically organized. And consciousness is just an emergence of that in this process of, if you call it evolution or ascension. That's another conversation that people are having. And so as you go into that's the culture of the organization. The willingness to let go of everything and start afresh every day. So again, I'll bring in one of these horrible words, backcasting. But the idea that we cannot plan for the next 12 months by saying we're going to set a goal for the 12 months from now, if we don't understand that in 200 years' time, what do we want to have left our grand and great-grandchildren? What is it? What is the legacy that we are building today? So when we ask that question 200 years down the road, suddenly everything physical goes away. Everything becomes spiritual. It becomes freedom, it becomes access, it becomes community, it becomes being together joyfully. And Hunter's work in Bhutan with the happiness index begins to make a completely different kind of sense in terms of responding to that acknowledgement that the systems as they are don't work. So how do we get there? Well, we can't plan it month after month. We need to have an end game, an ideal. And that ideal, again, is, and as Carol pointed out to me the other day on the phone, consciousness is not evolutionary. It is or it isn't. And we have it or we don't have it. And it happens or it doesn't happen. And how do we cultivate it? Well, we cultivate it by being mindful all the time. So that every decision we make, every action we take, is mindful. And the triple bottom line will no longer become needed. If everybody, each individual took the right decision every time, every moment, sustainability professionals would no longer be needed. We wouldn't need lawyers, we wouldn't need politicians. Wouldn't that be a different world? And so, triple group learning, of course, engages third order change, where we are willing to redesign everything again. And this is 80%, not good enough. How do we do it 84%? But that percentage point is not important. It is how do we feel that we are fulfilling that purpose, that meaning, that is actually bringing things back to well-being and health, which for me is regeneration, however you want to define it. And finally, this willingness allows us to prototype. Much of what I've heard in here are actually prototypes and models that are working. But if you put them way out in the world right away, except for the public donor and whatnot, if you go massive without making sure that, as Robert Merton said in 1938, we've removed all the possible unintended consequences from the model, then we no longer have the luxury of unintended consequences. We don't have the margin anymore. So our models have to be, our prototypes have to be able to be scaled up and mainstreamed from fairly perfect models. But they can still be tweaked, but we need to prototype them well. And so therefore, regenerative leaders work in an iterative fashion. They work in this again and again and again, and let's try it again, and let's try it again, and let's get closer. Let's get closer to that end game. And again, the metrics, they help sometimes, but not all the time. And how we have that conversation is through, well, this is the leadership, this idea of the circular systems of collaboration, where if we don't remove something key from that conversation, nothing happens. And Hunter brought it up this morning, and I'll share it with you, as I want to leave you with this little thing. Regeneration is inversely proportional to E. That's the formula. If we can apply that every day, maybe we can make it. The question is, what is E? And you all know what E is. What is it?
2.41.
How we manage our egos, how we manage our agendas, how we manage our conversations, either as enlightened beings seeking the best for all, or not, or having, as you were mentioning throughout the day, these conflictive agendas where we're each out to get what we want for our own representatives, our own shareholders, and of course part of what we teach is stakeholder management. How does that shift when you look at regenerative goals or sustainability goals? How do you go to a stakeholder management model rather than shareholder management model? You go away from the quarterly model to the 200-year model. how do you get politicians to get a 4-year cycle into a 200-year cycle when they're no longer going to be here? Obviously, is a great challenge. So I'm going to stop here with one phrase here from somebody who was the Executive Director of the Century Commission for Sustainable Florida, Steve Seibert, who's still involved in the sustainability space in Florida. This idea of checking egos and logos at the door. It doesn't mean that you don't remove positions. Those circular systems of conversation in these organizations, they actually have reports upwards and they have reports downwards. So there is a flow of communication, of information up and down the system. But at this level, if you are the mayor of the city, and you are the commissioner, and you're the CEO of a company, and I'm the janitor, and we're all sitting down about how we're going to clean the building, and you don't listen to me, then you're not regenerative. Because I know what products we're using, we're buying, whether they're clean or they're not clean, how much water the people who are actually using in the building, what's the proportion they're using. So the idea of everybody has a voice, and the expert in the room is the person who at that moment has the best idea, the best suggestion. And we listen. Again, going back to the idea of listening. And that's, of course, generative dialogue. Going back to Otto Scharmer again, this idea of getting beyond what is the conversations of the past and downloading old patterns of thinking and just hearing what you're saying and just saying what I want to say, and then you say your thing. How do we create this bigger holographic thing which actually is building on both and everybody else, which is that boundary-less, flowing potential for creating something that we've never thought we could create before. And some of the ideas that you are bringing here to the table actually seem to be embodiments of that potential. So I have learned a lot more from you. So, and really, on my behalf, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. That leaves us plenty of time for some questions. This is the echo we might give.
No, it just is turned on out there as opposed to in here.
Oh, and this?
Then we'll just use thank you, Hunter, for clarifying that.
In the community.
Yeah.
All right, so we have plenty of time for some questions, thoughts, feedback, criticisms.
I gotta go.
Oh.
It's very simple. I gotta go catch an airplane.
I love that last comment about regeneration is inversely proportional to ego. I think that is really important. I'm curious in terms of the practicing of that. So in a former life, I ran a clean energy company that worked with indigenous tribes, co-developing energy projects. It was entirely the community that made it all happen. They owned it, they even did the installations, etc. And it was almost impossible to find anyone willing to fund the process, the engagement, the gathering of that intel, and the people, what I described as social architecture that made those projects happen. We had to just cobble it together on this side of everything else. And so I'm curious about your advice to all of us about how do you pay for that? How do you make that work practically?
I wasn't going to share this. Are you familiar with Kania and Kramer out of Stanford?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, collective impact.
Yep.
So the research about collective impact, what doesn't work. The focus or the purpose of the funding is critical. The nonprofit world has this great problem of shame and ridicule about asking for money. I don't know if you've seen Dan Pallotta's TED Talk. And actually he brought this up. I was on the board of the South Florida chapter of the USGBC for like 2-3 years. I became the strategic planning chair and the community outreach chair. And it was all about fundraising and membership drives. Why? Because the mission just was not powerful enough to connect with the community. So it was all about building green and trying landscaping green and fundraising and trying to convince people in companies that it was good to put their banner up, their logo up in order to. So some of the most interesting things coming out of work like Kenyon Kramer's, or even if you haven't read it, a book called The Necessary Revolution by Peter Senge and a number of collaborators. For example, what do Pepsi-Cola and the World Wildlife Fund have in common? Why would people who hate each other come together and work together? Why would a scientist who hates the corporate world actually accept the corporate world coming in and helping them, and vice versa? Why would somebody that hates environmental regulation want to work with somebody like the WWF?
Because WWF needs their money, and Coca-Cola needs to have their brand image elevated through the affiliation.
Actually, yes, but it's simpler than that. It's more basic. What's one of the concerns about in Colorado?
Water.
What's Coca-Cola's product made of?
Water.
What's the World Wildlife Fund concerned about worldwide? So if you get somebody with management expertise and somebody with scientific expertise and can save the upper headwaters of the Yangtze River in China, so that the salmon can spawn, and meanwhile you build communities on the basis of that work and regenerate the water table, suddenly you get a partnership. So to answer your question very directly, one thing that nonprofits do very poorly is actually having corporations understand that my mission as a nonprofit is as important to your mission as a company as mine is to me. We are together in this. And this, if you watch Dan Bellotta, he tells us about how going back to the Mayflower, as I was talking to John a little earlier, people get off the Mayflower with a puritanical mindset where you cannot work for profit and be a good Christian. So the good Christian thing is tithing on the weekend on Sunday. So our nonprofits are all run by a very scarcity-minded mindset. And so every government funding organization or institution will only allow you 5% overhead to run your nonprofit, and you get regulated to death with everything else. So you better have a really great mission, which you do, which obviously is attracting people. So I think you've already answered your own question. You are creating such a powerful attractor, and this goes back to what I was saying before about quantum physics. If you create these highly vibrational fields, you become a magnet. Now, if you're perceived as a beggar who's going to a corporation or a bank and saying, well, we've made these 1,000 t-shirts and we put your logo on it if you give us $150, then the scale of your operation is never going to get rid of cancer, or is never going to get rid of poverty, is never going to get rid of disease. So one of the companies I worked with in Florida was a custodial services company. And so there are different models. One is how the company generates its own impact in the community, or how it partners with a nonprofit in order to achieve the same. But of course, these are individual partnerships that don't work. So when you look at things like public-private partnerships, or multi-stakeholder initiatives that aren't organized, so this wonderful center, if you don't have some sort of governance body that actually organizes every effort and makes each other accountable, the research shows that you be very well-minded, wonderful ideas, but it's always short-term. And I've been in several. I come from the coalition, an alliance of South Florida Climate Action, which again, well-meaning Sierra Club, Audubon, a whole bunch of people. We were not a nonprofit purposefully, so that we did not have to respect the non-lobbying, obviously, regulations of Florida with regard to nonprofit 501c3s. And of course, that ended very soon because there wasn't the organization that actually supported the efforts long term. These are the kinds of issues that we seem to find again and again and again. But this hub seems to have a much clearer idea of how to organize. But then get back to this company. What they do is, this is a custodial service company with now over 500 employees. The owner, the founder, is black. He speaks no Spanish. He speaks no Creole. but 90% of all his personnel, plus senior management, are all Hispanic. And Pat and I actually did training in Spanish for their personnel. This company actually allows their, or I would say empowers their employees to take cleaning products and the equipment at cost to the hospices, the schools where they have their children, where the employees have their children or their families, their relatives, and they can actually clean these places at cost. And they're supported by the organization also has a huge scholarship program to help people come in, provides legal service for them to get their papers if necessary, and also education so they can get their bachelor, they can get their high school diploma, and then go on to further education. So that's a company like the Nike Foundation that actually works with female athletes around the world in the 40 poorest countries. So that's the extension of the organization rather than a partnership, even though there are partnerships all around. But one of the critical findings of this particular research is here. That you do have this backbone support organization, that you are actually creating a separate organization that works together in an organized manner, that meets regularly and formally and has objectives and you will follow them. Hopefully with a generative dialogue, talking about everything else in terms of regenerative practice or leadership. So I just answered your question, I'm sorry. Hopefully.
Other questions?
Yes.
John, we're seeing a blurring between corporate impact and charity nonprofits. That blurring is happening more and more. That's the sign that was just put up actually a month and a half ago. That sign that
The billboard?
Yes, that billboard it's only a month and a half or 2 months old.
Yep.
So it was put up in Maryland and
Boston, actually.
Yeah, Boston, that's right. It was East Coast. So the nonprofits have been reacting to this in a variety of ways. Some have been saying, well, we're driven now by our company because we have a corporate relationship between our nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Some are saying, some are actually not understanding regenerative, but they actually are saying some of the components of regenerative. We have to do both. Which I think is an interesting idea of saying it's not just about the impact, but they should be concerned about their overhead. They should be concerned about their reinvestment in the community and the bioregion they're in, right? So some of the organizations are very aware of this, but right now the #1 production of nonprofits is actually through corporate impact. That's most nonprofits being generated are tied to a corporation now, which is an interesting mix. Do you see a blurring of those, and where do you see that going next?
Well, I think, and it was mentioned before, as the younger generations come up, they're looking for more meaning in their lives. Yep. They're not happy with what's going on. As Simon Sinek would say, they want to be manager by the end of the year. They're employed in. So there is a sense that this instant gratification of I want to be somewhere where I'm happy. But also we all want more meaning. And we've lost a lot of sense of meaning in the purpose and the things that we do. So there is a huge dissatisfaction. And again, that goes back to the non-rational, that intuitive sense that the way we're doing things are just not serving us. They're not creating well-being. They're not generating that happiness index. And the United States is not a model at all for that, of course, because we all are enslaved to our financial systems in one way or another. And as soon as you get somebody like Donna speaking, well, I'm sure that my retirement fund won't bear any kind of examination.
I'm happy to help do that.
Yeah, no, that's all I wanted to talk to you. Because that's the sort of things that are happening, that people are seeking ways, and these are the mechanisms that will provide us some way to get out of this trap. And the blurring of the lines is because nonprofits have a mindset that's very small and limited. It doesn't mean that their ideals aren't good. And the corporations, that they're very big and top-heavy and toxic at times, it doesn't mean that they can't shift as well and become more meaningful. And I think Colorado is one of the first states to bring in the L3C, correct? So it's not just about the B Corp, but the L3C. So the idea of mission-driven or purpose-driven, whatever it is, a social purpose that is driving a for-profit organization, I think makes perfect sense, as long as the underlying conversation is regenerative, not anything else. But not everybody wants to give up their, going public or taking away the $1.5 million a year or whatever and sharing it with everybody. So the L3C is not a money for everybody.
So I guess a question on your research in this area. So I come from Baltimore, and I do struggle with the B Corp and the other things because of kind of my background. And that is that I'm very frustrated where business has moved. But in the mid-50s, when Baltimore's harbor was on fire and everything, 15 family businesses put their money together to set up the Greater Baltimore Committee, and they invested in over 10 years, did the replanning for the city. The city didn't have a really good planning department. They built a nationally recognized state-of-the-art planning and then moved it over to the city. These were corporations that it wasn't a non-profit, they weren't, they were still, some were publicly traded, some were privately, they all had investors of some sort. So I grew up in a world where the idea that you would give your money or give your time and your resources, and all of our companies always allow our employees to work during the day to something they really cared about, and they were paid. So I struggle with this whole disconnect because it's, we've had to now go to, we didn't used to need the B Corp world. I'm not saying we don't need it. I'm just trying to figure out where did this evolution go away from all that?
Let me get to the end. You have a climate summit with the mayor tomorrow?
Yes.
Some of you coming to that?
Yes, here tomorrow night.
Right here.
Right?
Yes.
So I was looking at the 2020 Sustainability Goals, which was the report from January of last year, which I presume they're going to update, which of course is not a dashboard, it's a static PDF, so you can't really tell where it's going.
Right.
But some of the indicators seem to be quite positive, and some not so positive. But you have an opportunity here of somebody proposing a common agenda. So what is that common agenda that's bringing government, education, business, and nonprofits together in that conversation over the next 200 years? So can the mayor think beyond his electoral cycle, and can everybody else in this room think beyond our lifetime about what things, like the Iroquois, and Carol mentioned them about this idea of taking decisions and thinking about 7 generations down the road, which brought up, the 7th generation ran. So how do you make that kind of decisions in an environment that is predicated on short-term processes? So how do you break out of that mindset? So again, that conversation, if you can have that more open generative dialogue, is can we think beyond the 2020 goals? What is it to mean to have a zero waste, zero energy, zero toxicity, so like the Nike goals for themselves, based on the Brangard analysis of their footwear in 1997.
This is sort of a follow-up to that, but when I hear you say that, I feel like that requires a change in consciousness, or a consciousness to begin with in some people's cases, about a greater good beyond themselves or their election cycle or whatever. And to me, it seems like that is going to require a change in incentive. Like almost a change in incentives. Like if we're talking about change in paradigms, like how do people feel motivated, right? Like how do people feel gratified? How do people feel that they are being effectively rewarded, and is there an opportunity for sort of cross-sector engagement where, the panel earlier, where I was sort of thinking, I come from a lens of, I work for a nonprofit community developer, and so we're constantly trying to, do affordable housing and community engagement and any sort of nonprofit commercial centers, and, of just thinking, we have this, I guess we have this conversation frequently of, like, for example, if the city, took a stance where they chose to incentivize effectively developers doing good things, right? So if it's building affordable housing and building community assets, rather than, kind of what I feel like is happening now, which is either putting on, requirements or saying, we'll give you density if you build affordable housing, or, there's incentives, but I don't feel like they're being derived from the right places. I mean, I feel like the whole thing sort of needs to be
This is the important thing. Again, if we go back to triple loop learning, we all want to have dopamine and endorphins, right? That's the end game biologically. How do we reach happiness? By doing these things? We don't. By controlling, by manipulating data, by doing short-term things, by fragmenting, actually we don't. So we have to go to a different place, a different space. And so what I would suggest is, if we end up, could we end up just with a very brief breathing exercise to respond to your question from a different space? Mm-hmm. Yes? Would you be willing?
Yeah.
Okay. So those of you who will want to, would you just sit up straight? And put your hands on your legs. Just put your feet flat on the floor, just for a second. So see if we can entertain this as one of the solutions. So as you do that, and I know some of you are meditators in the room, so just close your eyes if you want to. If you feel threatened, don't do it. Just relax. Take a deep breath in, and as you do, just make sure your spine is straight, so that you feel totally grounded, that your feet are flat on the floor and you're connecting to the center of the earth. Because it's the earth that gives us everything that's brought us here. And I'm assuming that nobody in this room is thinking about where their next meal is coming from, and therefore can aspire to real personal well-being. And as you breathe in, just focus on the breath coming in, and then just release it. And again. Hold it in a second. And let everything else go. Just let it go. It doesn't matter. It's these mind games that we play. And we have 50,000 of those every day, which we repeat every day again and again and again. And we just want to let them go. So, from your breathing, then take your attention to your feet. And feel yourself